Serenity, always the gourmet, has eaten most snacks. Serenity has always eaten the most gourmet snacks. Here's the dream. What if you could read a book, read the left page, read the right page, regular story, but then you could read it again, this time read each line all the way across both pages, and it would still make sense, but be a slightly different story. I don't know if it's possible to create a full book of this, but here we'll show you a few short stories where you can read them multiple ways, and I am saving the best one for last. The one at the end of the video has the cats save us from an alien invasion, but don't skip ahead or you'll miss Serenity's cover of Seven Nation Army.
I'm going to Wichita.
Wait, not yet. We're calling this a riffle story, named after the way to shuffle a deck of cards. Start with a stack of 52 cards, all in order, representing all of the lines on two side-by-side pages of a book, meant to be read normally. Then you divide the deck in half, left page, right page, and riffle shuffle them together so they alternate left, right, left, right.
Or you could do two different stories that add up to a third. Take two decks of cards and riffle these two stories together, and you create a new third story that alternates between them.
Okay, now that seems an easier starting point. Adding stories. What does addition even mean in the context of language? I can do multiplication with language though. Check this out. Serenity, you're looking so thin today.
Aw, thank you so... Wait, why'd you wink at the camera just then?
That's math. When you wink, you're sharing a secret with someone. It's like taking your language and multiplying it by -1. You get the opposite.
Hiss, boo, mean.
Well, regular math addition, 5 plus 3 equals 8. Easy, normal, add two numbers, get a third different number. Also works for light waves, like colors or paint. Add yellow plus blue and you get green.
You can also add sound. Take two different tones and add them together, and you hear a distinct beating that's at a different frequency than either of the two tones that you started with. When I spell out letters, does W plus O plus R plus D add to make the word word?
No, that doesn't work. 5 plus 3 does not equal 53.
For light and sound, there's a mixing, combining together at the same time. That's addition. So here's our first attempt at linguistic addition, a zipper story. Left and right, both separate independent stories, and when added together by alternating every other line, you get a different third story.
A whisper of treasure beckoned, daring me to make my move. The distraction had worked, and my fangs closed on their target. Total victory was achieved for the unknowing accomplices.
Snacks just waiting to be eaten. With a crash, Indiana landed in chaos. I snuck to the counter, unnoticed, unseen. Swiping the treat, my prize was secured. But no time to celebrate, since planning for tomorrow starts now. A whisper of treasure beckoned. Snacks just waiting to be eaten, daring me to make my move. With a crash, Indiana landed in chaos. The distraction had worked, and I snuck to the counter, unnoticed, unseen. My fangs closed on their target. Swiping the treat, my prize was secured. Total victory was achieved, but no time to celebrate, since for the unknowing accomplices, planning for tomorrow starts now.
Two strategies would make these stories more interesting. The first is compound words. If the last word on one story and the first word in the other story combine to form a different third word, that would help distinguish the third story from either of the first two. Like fat and her could become father. Number two, double meanings or double tenses. Like the word treat and cook could either be a noun or a verb.
Now here's my concern. I'm a little worried that we're not writing stories. I'm worried we're writing poetry.
I would define poetry as a story written using rules that make it both harder to write and harder to read. Uh-oh.
Yo, I don't want anybody accusing me of being a poet either. So let's call in an expert.
I'm Dr. William Woods. I'm with Schreiner University. I'm an English professor here at Schreiner. I've been here for quite some time, and I have taught poetry. I'm a writer as well. I'm a creative writer as well.
Dr. Woods, how would you define poetry? How can you tell whether or not a piece of writing that you're looking at is a poem?
It is concise in nature. Poetry is different than prose. It relies heavily on meter and rhythm. You can hear poetry more though than prose. It uses a lot of literary elements such as symbolism and metaphors, similes. The entire purpose of poetry is it is trying to get a reader to respond, usually strong feelings, evoke strong emotions in a very tightly patterned, concise nature. The second answer is that's kind of gone by, in this postmodern world of ours, that's kind of going by the wayside. Some of the rules are changing quickly. For a long time, as you know, poetry had to rhyme. We all kind of said, well, this is a poem because it rhymes. And then that kind of went by the wayside. And then we had some free verse, and then poetry had to look a certain way on the page. And then that kind of went by the wayside. There are traditionalists who will tell you this is a poem and this is prose, but quite frankly, there's a lot of overlap now.
You've seen all our Riffle stories, including the one about the aliens. Did we actually write Riffle poems?
I would say you are very much onto something known as a prose poem. It's a form of poetry that feels as though it's a story, and it absolutely is poetic in nature, so I was pleased.
Oh no, tragedy.
What is being done in this story is highly original, and there's not a lot of models out there that do this. Now, in the world of poetics, I will say, there was a movement called Dada poetry, which was a response to the horrors of World War I, where poets stopped trying to rhyme. It just didn't make sense. We'd all come back from World War I, and it was like, nothing. The page doesn't hold what I want to do. And so the Dada poets, they played with the line. You've probably seen like concrete poetry where a poem looks like something that it's supposed to represent, a Christmas tree, yay, and the poem is written like Christmas tree. So there's a little bit of that of what's happening in your new form. The absurdists, the Dada poets who would take words from a poem and cut it out and throw it on a page and lay the language, lay the words on top of one another. There's a little bit of that, but they weren't making as much, there wasn't as much narrative sense as your story does.
Maybe it's not so bad. Dr. Woods, what's the coolest form of poetry? And no jokes about engineers not being cool.
No jokes about, my brother's an engineer. He's the coolest guy I ever knew. For lots of us, we come to poetry very young, with mom and dad or someone reading to us Dr. Seuss fables, fairy tales, and that's okay for a while when we're very young. But then we find poetry in another form that many of us like and many of us are drawn to, and that is absolutely in the songwriting, in songs, in the lyrics of songs, more so than when we think about these poets back in the day. I think most of us get our poetry now from the songwriters, and in my world it's writers like Bruce Springsteen and Bob Dylan and Warren Zevon, but certainly for different generations it's different songs that come across.
I'm going to Wichita. These two engineers couldn't hold me back. I'm gonna fight them off. And then I'll eat all the snacks. Ba 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 ba. Boom 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 ba ba ba.
So one of the things that we're very proud of at Schreiner University, our location here in the Texas Hill Country is an ideal place. We have a vibrant music scene. We have a number of artists who have come through this way. Speaking of great songwriters, we've had some great poets. We've had some really, really good songwriters who have worked closely with Schreiner over the year. But just recently, we put together a songwriters group called the Songkeepers. And the idea was young people would come join us, work with established songwriters, and become songwriters themselves. And I guess that's been about 3 or 4 years now, and we've had some amazing young folks. It's scary. Writing poetry, being a creative writer at all, is just like when you're putting yourself out there, it's kind of scary. And so if you're a young writer and you're a little bit hesitant and you're sharing something very personal, it's nice to have someone mentor you and work you through the process. And we've had some songwriters go on and do some amazing stuff, self-publish their music. You can go find their music right now, and that's the Shriner Songkeepers program.
Poetry or not, here is our riffle story. The kiddies will act it out first, left page, right page, regular style. Then the second time through, the kiddies are going to act it out as I read all the way across both pages together. The orb crackled, and above them, a hologram burst to life showing treats.
They're after the snacks.
Serenity gasped, rallying herself for courage to move into position. The plan began with Serenity's weight drawing the ship's attention away from Indy's direct path to the back of the orb to approach the ship's highest access point. Earth's smallest, boldest heroes stared through alien plans projected across the sky in glowing trails of battle.
Distraction is key.
Serenity whispered, giving Indiana the signal. Indy leapt, swatting the glowing sphere, distorting the image. His main objective? Mask Serenity's entrance. Clawing and biting, she took the insecure panel and set the orb to crash, barely escaping to her sunglasses.
Guess they weren't feline up to the challenge.
This time I read all the way across both pages, and this time you'll see the story's similar, but it's going to be a little bit different. The orb crackled, and above them, a hologram burst to life, showing alien plans projected across the sky in glowing trails of treats.
They're after the snacks.
Serenity gasped, rallying herself for battle.
Distraction is key.
Serenity whispered, giving Indiana the courage to move into position. The plan began with Serenity's signal. Indy leapt, swatting the glowing sphere, distorting the image, his weight drawing the ship's attention away from Indy's main objective, Mask Serenity's entrance. Clawing and biting, she took the indirect path to the back of the orb to approach the ship's highest secure panel and set the orb to crash, barely escaping to her access point. Earth's smallest, boldest heroes stared through sunglasses.
Guess they weren't feline up to the challenge.
It was way harder than I thought it was going to be to get everything to line up just right so the language flowed properly. Has anybody ever written anything like this before?
I'm intrigued by it. I was fascinated by, as we talked about earlier, the first time I watched it, I just thought to myself, that is absolutely the coolest laying on of words to tell a story this way and this way. Now, interestingly enough, and I know you're a pop culture guy as well, in graphic novels, in comic books, Scott McCloud does a great work called Understanding Comics, and he looks at if we read our comics this way for some cultures, if we read it this way. There was a little bit of that, but not just the words and pages like that.
I'm sure somebody else could do it way better, and I would love to read somebody else's version of it. So if you know of any books, poems, anything, or if you take your own chance at it and want to share your work with me, please leave me a comment, point me in the right direction, title, author, link, whatever you have. I think this is really cool, but I know it can be way better than we did it. But for now, if you liked watching Serenity as a rock star, then you gotta check out Detective Indiana in this video about a bridge collapse. No math, no poetry, but the kiddies still do their amazing storytelling, so I think you're gonna love it.